It's episode 99 of the Improv London podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Moses, and this week's guest is Arfie.
Hello, Stuart. How are you?
Hello, Arfie. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Asking the tough questions from the start. You're perhaps best known. You're perhaps best known for Big Now.
Big Now.
Big Now.
Stop it. We don't do that anymore. So, Big Now, to explain to your listeners, is a clown punk trio, if you will. We dick about in a very physical way, although we don't really do that anymore. I think what you've seen was Big Now version 2. We're on to version 3 at the moment.
Oh, right.
So I think it was version 2 that you hated. Just for context, for those who haven't listened to every previous episode of this podcast, as I have, I definitely have. In a previous episode, whilst talking to Lizzie Mace, 1/3 of Big Now, unless we're doing it by mass, in which more like a quarter, I'm half. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyway. Stuart mentioned that he loathes Big Now and everything we stand for, which is fair. It's not for everyone. I believe you accused us of being art, and that's fair because in any improv show you should be aiming for it to be funny, but if it isn't funny, at least it's art. So we nailed that one. We nailed not being funny enough to be comedy. So that was a lot of fun. Thanks for that, Stuart. And yet, we're not great at taking compliments. So Brendan Way, the lovely Brendan Way, who doesn't deserve any of the shit that I've thrown at him, he described us after one show a year ago as being at the top of our game. And we, of course, took offence. We just went, oh, so it's all downhill from here. Oh, thanks for that, Brendan. Yeah, great review. We'll really be quoting that one. It was a lovely thing for a lovely man to have said, and we just ripped into him mercilessly. I say we, mostly me. That's kind of my thing. It shouldn't be. That's a horrible thing to have as a thing, but that's how I was. And he takes it well, which shouldn't be a reason to keep doing it, but it really is. And then you say some really nasty stuff about us, and we loved it. Like, we've applied for festivals using that quotation. We just love it so much. Is this art? Am I supposed to enjoy it or just sort of marvel at it? I mean, yes. The answer's yes. You're supposed to do that. One or the other, ideally both, but hey-ho. You can't win them all, and we haven't won you yet.
Can you talk me through the different, because I'm really interested in the incarnations.
Yes.
So starting with version 1, version 2, which we'll maybe come to my reaction to that in a minute, and then version 3.
I imagine we will, yes. Okay.
So what was the genesis of it, and let's track the evolution through the different versions.
Okay. Now, obviously, these version numbers are very crass and really don't reflect the realities of the on-the-ground situation, but fundamentally, version 1 was where we were trying to do satire and failing badly.
Right.
Occasionally we would fail well, but mostly we failed badly. There was one show where the audience left. Not during our set, they left at the interval. And to be fair, the show wasn't going well at all. We weren't even the worst of it. But we were. No, we were definitely the worst of it. I won't name any names, but there were other groups on who were just full of brilliant improvisers and bombed completely. So it wasn't just us.
Why were they bombing?
It wasn't working. Something about the atmosphere in the room just didn't land. And it's a room that's normally great. I won't say which one. Gosh, I'm being so cautious. It's not like a conversation with me at all, is it?
He's normally so indiscreet, listeners. Normally so indiscreet.
I really am. Yeah. No, so it was remarkable, but that kind of emblemized? That's not a word. Let's say it is. That's emblemized our first era to a certain extent.
So what was the attraction of doing satire?
Well, no one else is doing it, and we're into satire.
Oh, right.
And that's broadly the scope of it, but also there's a lot to be done there. And yet, it's a huge challenge to do it with improv, because, you've got the, the inner game and the outer game or whatever, or the inner scene and the outer scene, where you have the understanding of what's going on within the scene, you've got what the actors are doing, and you're constantly asking yourself, what does this actor want, or what does this character want, and to add a whole extra layer to that of satire, because satire is already working on multiple levels. So if you're playing a polar bear that's supposed to be Boris Johnson, you're on 2 levels there, as well as the additional layers of actor, improviser, and so on. So it's tricky, and it takes a lot of specialised work to get there, and no one was teaching it. And the books don't tell us about it. So we formed after doing an intensive with Messing and Mason, as one does. And we were so excited about the stuff that they taught us, but also stuff that they just touched on. And satire was one of those things. And when we formed the group, we went, what is it that really appeals to us? What is it that excites us? All of these things that we've done, that we've talked about, learned about, and so on, what is going to be our thing? Why are we doing this? Because there's no point just forming an improv group and just going, let's just do some improv, unless you're just starting out, in which case that's the ideal reason to do it. And so all of us were veterans of the scene. The others much more so than I. I'd only been improvising for about a year and a half at that stage, I think, and the others for decades. Actual decades. I might be lying for comic effect, but I might actually be accurate there. Who knows? You'll never know.
Although I warned you before the podcast not to start naming members of the team if you can't remember all the members of the team, but in this case, it was...
So, it was me, Lizzie Mace, Sophie Pumphrey, and Susan Cunningham initially. She left after about, I think, 6 months, and then we solidified into what we have now. So I think we pretty much launched into version 2 shortly after that, where it was a lot more, I think, visceral.
Okay, we'll come to...
A lot more in your face.
Yes.
Certainly your face.
It's certainly my face. It's just before we... Yeah, because I want to talk about that. But so with version 1, what was the form that you were doing when you were doing satire? Was it newspaper headlines stuck on a board, or am I getting you confused with somebody else?
Yeah, you're getting us confused with someone else.
Okay.
That sounds like musical to me.
No, it was pre-musical, but...
Okay. Never mind. What we did was... we asked the audience for something that was very big and very now. And for our first show, which was at a Hoopla Launchpad, it was the Shard. Because that's... I mean, listeners at home won't necessarily be aware of this, but we are very much in the shadow of the Shard right here. We're both currently staring at the Shard, and it is ominous.
It is both big and now.
Yes. So, we then asked the audience, okay, what does that make you think? What does that instill in you? Because even at that stage, we were wanky. And people said, oh, it looks unfinished, because at that stage it had only recently been finished, and people hadn't realised, because there's that bit at the top where it looks apparently unfinished. You remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can still see. And so we did a set based off that, and I don't know if we'd found our transitions at that stage, but we went for an approach to transitions which was based on the warm-up Chicken Monster.
Which we should explain for those that haven't played Chicken Monster.
And yet we won't. So Chicken Monster is one of the many names of that one warm-up where someone does a gesture and makes a sound, and then the next person repeats it as exactly as possible. And this is one of those ones where it's a real test of whether you're paying attention, because you can really see who hasn't been copying the previous person exactly. So I was coaching a team once who... We did this as a warm-up because it's great fun. And one of them wasn't able to move fully, so there was a bit where people were spinning round hugely, and it got to her and she couldn't. And then people after her spun round hugely. And that was clear that they weren't repeating exactly what they'd seen, because they were going to what they expected, which loses a lot of the joy of the piece. The joy is from going into whatever stupid thing happens, and a lot of the time that'll be someone will giggle just before their turn because the previous thing has been so absurd. And some of it will be that someone sneezes in the middle or whatever. Any little incidental thing is part of the piece. And we had the most fun with that and went, why are our shows not as fun as our warm-ups? And this, you'll find, is a recurring feature. We went, why aren't we able to tap into what's fun in our shows? And we went, well, Chicken Monster's what's fun. So we did that as a show, basically.
Is this version 2?
It's 1.7. So the transitions between scenes are we'll take physicality from within a scene, and then the next person will repeat that, and then we'll Chicken Monster it into something else, and then we would pluck one of those end results and use that as an initiation. And so that was how we got towards a more physical performance style. And we built on that as well with throwing in other stuff. You mentioned at the beginning Big Now. There's
Big Now.
Big Now. So
now.
This is a running quote-unquote joke that we did in 2, maybe 3 of our shows, but they became quote-unquote legendary.
It really caught on.
It
Even
really
amongst
caught
people who have never seen Big Now.
Especially amongst people who've never seen Big Now. For many people, that is the full Big Now experience, and I'm delighted. So what we did was... there was the Night Tube show at Hoopla, which was a sequence of small bit shows after the main Saturday or Friday night show early in 2017, I think it was. Or maybe it wasn't. Who knows?
Who cares?
It was a time in the past. And we did a 5-minute set at that, and we decided to do a trailer for Big Now. Now, I say we decided, as with so many ideas that you'll hear that sound absolutely ridiculous, I suggested it, and the others are really good at yes-anding, no matter how bad the idea is. And from what I'm going to tell you, you will only hear the good ideas because the rest have been forgotten about. So let's not pretend that I'm some kind of Ken Campbell-style genius who just came up effortlessly with wonderful ideas left, right and centre. No, I've come up with plenty of bad ones, but they died and we're not going to hear about them now, unless they're fun. Who knows? And so we did a trailer. So what we would do was say Big Now a lot, because that's how trailers go, isn't it? You know, you've seen the trailer for Alien, where it's just a bunch of people saying Alien, Alien, Alien. I don't know. I don't think I've seen that trailer in a while. Not a patch on the Prometheus trailer, because it takes people longer to say Prometheus than to say Alien.
Prometheus.
That was a great trailer. I mean, there are so many bad trailers in this day and age, and then you get incredible ones like that where you go, my God, the trailer to Prometheus is a far better film than Prometheus. I could go on. My main issue with Prometheus is it's a minor thing. It really is a minor thing. It's at the end where, spoilers, the spaceship is falling and about to crush... Noomi Rapace and Charlize Theron. Yeah, sure, why not?
I'm yes-ending that.
Yeah, oh, you haven't seen it?
I have seen it, I can't remember.
Fair enough. One of them stumbles, falls to the side, and the other one keeps running in a straight line. And the ship crushes the one who was running in a straight line. And the interesting thing is, the ship was rolling in a straight line. And what's particularly galling about this is they shot it in 3D, and yet the makers clearly had no understanding of 2 dimensions. I didn't care for Alien Covenant either. I mean, all of these bloody recent ones. I'm not a fan at all. I mean, I loved Alien. It's an amazing film.
Big Now.
Big Now, yeah. So fundamentally, at heart,
you were doing a trailer.
We were doing a trailer.
You were saying Big Now a lot in the trailer.
We were saying Big Now a lot, and I mean, I think I'm one of the few, but I love Alien 3. I think it's a really fascinating film. It would have been much better if they'd gone along with the original idea, which was a monastery in space. But what might have been? It's not like improv where you get to do it again in a different way. So, Big Now. And we, as well as just saying Big Now constantly, which became, I don't know, a meme, we also did slogans. So it was Big Now doing something. I don't know. I'm out of practice. Big Now, nowing you're big since 1974. That's. I was about to say they were a lot better than that, but I have no guarantee they were. I think 2/3 of them were better than that, but mine weren't. And in amongst all this, we threw in examples of the kind of scenes that people could see us do. So, really weird, stilted stuff, which wasn't the kind of scenes that we were actually doing. But do you know what? Stuart knows what. We later went on to do exactly those kinds of scenes, so it was very prescient in ways that we couldn't really have expected, you know? But that was a lot of fun, and we borrowed bits of that for our main show. And we threw in a greater physicality to what we were doing than just the chicken monster transitions. My principle behind an improv show, if you'd like to hear,
I would love to hear,
is that the entire show is the entire show. And I think we can all understand what I mean by that. But I will explain, because I'm quite certain we don't. The audience sees everything. Even when they don't know, they see everything. So, if an edit is a sweep, they see that, and certainly the first time they see that, they go, what the fuck was that? Who was that person? Why did they walk across the front? I don't understand. And we forget that, because we end up going for the same grammar of shows time and time again. And the second, third, fourth time you see an improv show, you get it. And thereafter, you get it. But up to that point, you don't get it, and you shouldn't be expected to. And so, I can't even remember who taught me this, which is a real shame, because I want to show all my working and references.
You get more points for it, but, you know.
Yeah, well, borders to it.
If you just have the correct answer, that's also fine.
Not in maths.
This isn't maths.
No.
Improv might be maths, and actually that's something I do want to ask about.
Okay, that'll be interesting when we get to that. Yeah. Where were we?
We were talking about Big Now.
Oh, Big Now, yes. And so, the idea there is that
the audience sees everything.
The audience sees everything, so the space between scenes is as important as the scenes themselves, sometimes more so. So, for a couple of shows, we ended up with the space between the scenes taking up as much time as the scenes themselves. But they should certainly take the same importance. The whole show is the whole show. The get is part of the show. The getting onto the stage is part of the show. The failing to get onto the stage is often part of the show. And we wanted to play with that. This notion that the whole show is the whole show. I say we. I definitely wanted to play with it, and the others were gracious enough to go along with it. We do disagree about things, but, we still try. And some of the things fail. And different people have different opinions about which things those were. Stuart. So, we ended up with a situation where we had these bits between scenes which were more than just transitions. They were physical, not scenes, but skits, I suppose. You know, pissing about sessions. And lest anyone think that this is self-indulgent, all improv is self-indulgent at heart.
But some improv is more self-indulgent than others.
Undeniably. But at no point were we ever going, fuck the audience, we're going to do what we want. We were always taking into account, and still do, the audience experience. We want the audience to have a good experience.
You see, this is what I'm interested in. Do
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what do you mean by a good experience? Do you want them to enjoy it? And is it possible to enjoy it and have a good experience? Are they the same thing?
Okay, the audience doesn't have to have fun. And that is difficult at a comedy night. But then not all improv nights are comedy nights. So a night at Hoopla, for instance, is going to be a lot more geared to the comedy, and a night at the nursery could be geared either way. I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule. You get very theatrical things on at Hoopla, and you get very silly things on at the nursery.
Yeah, but it's a general rule, yeah.
Yeah. And other excellent venues are available. So the audience matters.
But they don't necessarily need to have fun.
They don't necessarily need to have fun, no. So, some of my favourite films, I've got to the end of it and gone, that's a brilliant film. I loved it. I definitely didn't have fun.
Right.
Like, you don't get to the end of a Bellatar film and go, that's 7 hours of Hungarian suffering. What a lot of fun! But you do, and I say you, but I do mean I, you do go, that was brilliant. I wish I ever had the time to watch that again. So, there's more to life than just having fun. But if the audience is expecting to have fun, you do need to recognise that. So, that's why sometimes you'll go in an anti-fun direction, because you're acknowledging their wish to have fun and going, we know what you want, and we're deliberately subverting that. Some people hate that, and that's a shame. And this is the thing, you can't please all the people all the time.
Very true.
And some groups are going to be more divisive than others. And I don't have any regrets about my groups falling into that. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So, we want the audience to come away having had an experience that they will keep with them for a while.
Yes.
And it's hard to deny that we do that.
So I wouldn't deny that for one moment.
Yeah, sometimes that works out as an unfortunate thing because they might want to lose that experience, but that's your call, Stuart. And it is unfortunate when people leave having had a bad time. And no one wants that. Well, maybe some people do, and I don't like those people. But we want the audience to have had a good experience. It doesn't mean necessarily having fun. It could be that their lives have changed forever. Or it could be that they just end up saying big now for weeks afterwards and don't quite know why. And sometimes people are just delighted and amazed but aren't necessarily having fun. But we're trying. And if you're not going to do something different, why are you doing at all? And there are times when you see groups going through the motions and you think, are you even having fun? Why are you doing this? I want you to have fun, and maybe your fun might not be on stage. But also, I do think there needs to be an understanding of why you are on stage, why you think what you are doing is worth other people's time. And this is something that irks me about watching some other groups, solely because I see myself there. And I see all the mistakes of previous things I've done and go, why aren't you considering the audience? And so I'm fully aware that my irritation with other people, as is so often the case, comes from irritation at myself. It's completely legit. But it still makes me very uncomfortable when you see a group who are just pissing about and you go, who's this for? And I can see why you'd think that Big Now falls into that category. But it's always for the audience. It's partly for us, of course, but it's always for the audience. And if we don't try to do something great, then we're going to do something mediocre. If we do try and we fail, we tried.
Yeah.
So that's Big Now.
I've always... Yes.
No, you were talking.
No, I was just going to say, I've always found Big Now interesting.
Faint praise.
I haven't always had fun. But that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I wanted to know. Because if you were seeking to always give the audience fun, which I didn't think you were...
It's very plain that we aren't.
But if you were, then I would say that you had failed.
Yes, and that's fair to say. And certainly at the beginning, we did try and we did fail on that front. Now, to be fair, we have given the audience a lot of fun since. And so we recently had a lot of shows where we've been in this kind of transitional phase where a lot of the time only two of us have been available. So we've done these weirder shows.
Wow.
Oh, that's... just realised what I said there. But yeah, no, they have been weirder. So one that particularly sticks in my mind was... It was Lizzie and me. We were at Duck Duck Goose. And we decided beforehand. So we went into it with a manifesto. Oh, and Big Now, of course, have a manifesto. But we had a special manifesto for one night only, which we've tried to repeat every time since, which was, in future years, people will look back on this night as the birth of the new improv. Let us destroy improv as it is at the moment and have it reborn. Which is always going to fail. In the same way that Coca-Cola's mission statement of we want more people to drink Coke than water will always fail. But they're fucking aiming high, and, you know, if anyone could manage it, they could. So fair play to those wonderful corporate people. Yeah. So what we did ended up having no scenes in it. We were on stage for about 15 minutes, and not a single scene happened. And it was compelling and beautiful. I can say that because it was. And
How come you didn't have any scenes? I don't understand.
What do you mean, how come? Do you mean, what did we do, or do you mean, why? Do you want both?
Yeah, if both are on offer, I would like both.
Sure. Why was we didn't have to.
Right.
And we wanted to explore other things.
So was it just you two chatting?
No. No, barely that at all. As part of it, I decided to be a bit of an imp of the perverse. You know, like Loki or Bugs Bunny, who are basically the same person. Anyway, in the middle of a scene where we were... I say scene, it wasn't scene so much. In the middle of a conversation, Lizzie said something very deep, meaningful, and beautiful. And I, still in character, in a very sincere way, said, new choice. And Lizzie said something else beautiful, profound, lovely, and completely different. You know, the way that new choice should be played and is never played. And so I said that a few times, and then we carried on with the conversation. Until eventually I said something, and of course Lizzie responded with new choice. And I said what the thunder said. Now, for the listeners at home, there was an improv group called Two of Wands, which was Lizzie Mace, with whom I was doing that show, and Michael Such, with whom I was not. This particular phrase is taken from The Wasteland, a bit of T.S. Eliot, because I'm not the most pretentious person in improv, and that's really disappointing to me. Yeah, that's a real failure on my part. But anyway, it's this then transforms what they do into a like beat poem improvised, while the other one does an interpretive dance. So as soon as I said that, Lizzie went with it and started doing this poem, and I realised, oh crikey, I've set myself up to do an interpretive dance. So that's the kind of thing we did. We were mostly talking to the audience as twin narrators, but not narrating anything in particular. There was stuff like, the day has come to an end, and we each had our own position on the day, but it was definitely talking to the audience. But then we would find disagreements amongst ourselves, and we would turn to each other and discuss. But you'd be hard pressed to call it a scene. So that's what we did, and that was really exciting. But recently we've discovered this new form called the monoskene. The monoskene is I don't know how to describe it. It contains only one edit, which happens at the end, which ends the scene, and up until that, it's a single scene.
Right.
So I don't understand the derivation of the name, but it's an interesting one, and we've been trying that out and loving it. And it turns out that we can still be very definitely big now without all the physical pissing about between scenes.
Which I always felt was more fun for you than the audience.
No, I never enjoyed it.
So, what is Big Now's manifesto? You mentioned they had one.
It's a Manifesto.
Oh, right. Manifesto.
It's long, and I haven't read it in a while, and we've been talking about redrafting it.
Oh,
so
right.
We do still want to do satire, and maybe this is the ideal opportunity for us to talk about Heads Might Roll.
Yes, that would be a seamless link.
Yes.
Let's no one draw attention to the link nature of that transition.
Yes, so what Big Now would do at this point we would do it some kind of dance, which starts with the notion of satire and ends with Heads Might Roll. So Heads Might Roll is a nursery original, which is to say a show at the nursery theatre which they give time and resources to develop and then give it a run of. And I directed that show. I'll fess up to that one. And the idea is it's an independent inquiry. And we look at something that's wrong with the world or the country and then explore it through the medium of scenes or diatribes or interviews or political cartoons. So I described it as a happy, carefree romp through everything that's wrong with the world. And it's one of those ones where I realised once I'd put in the application that I'd just thrown my personality at the page and let it stick. And I mean, those are the kind of shows that I'm most interested in. So you look at the other nursery originals. So United, which is Joelle being enthusiastic and supportive. I mean, that's him as a performance. And so I was really excited by the idea of that. I thought, yes, I want to be involved in that because I want to be in a show which is just Joelle. I want to be wrapped in that. It's just like being hugged for an entire show. It's so lovely. And then you've got James LaLasha, who is directing next season's The Fauna of Penny Forest, which, for copyright reasons, I won't name what it's based on, but you can work it out. And it's all about woodland animals, and James is an expert on animals and loves them. So it's their personality writ large. And so I love the way that the originals allow people to do that, to take on a show that is them. And it doesn't need to be a compromise in the same way that a team does, obviously there's going to be negotiation and you work out what works and you do take input from the team, but at the end of the day, what you say goes. And yet, that's not really true, because at the end of the day, what the cast do on stage goes, and the director tends not to be there. And so they get to do whatever they like.
So you say you were the director, so how does one direct an improv show?
You practice improvising. You make things up, and then you see what worked, and then you make things up again, and you keep doing it over and over until you're sick of it, or brilliant and famous.
But you were giving them parameters. You were steering.
I was giving them
direction.
parameters, and it started off as a very, very tightly regimented show. That it was essentially, here is the inquiry. They sit at the side of the stage throughout, and they will pass across to rants or scenes, and that was pretty much it. And it didn't really seem to land. It didn't feel like its own thing. The scenes didn't really pop, and the format didn't make any kind of sense. But then the cast suggested various additions, so having interviews with people, so to be able to inquire of people. And that actually became the main part of the show. And that's a little bit of a problem, because the cast is 10 people, and you've got 3 people on stage at all time, and then you've got 7 people to do all the other stuff. And when you're rattling through things at a hell of a rate between scenes and all that kind of thing, it's fine. But when you've got a single character sitting there talking for 5 minutes, other people don't get much stage time. And so I regret that. I came up with a format that didn't work, and together we came up with one based on that did, but we still had the cast of a size that worked for the previous format. Right. So there'll be shows where people barely get out on stage, and it's a real shame, because I love all of those performers. They're really good. I wouldn't have cast them otherwise. I was really disappointed that I couldn't cast quite as many people as I wanted, but then wonderfully, 2 people I offered things to had to drop out before we began, and I was able to offer it to everyone then as a result. So that was wonderful. But it ended up being too many. It's 10 people, that's too many for a 45-minute show, unless it's a very specific kind of show. So I've made mistakes there, learnt from them, but what worked is the satire. And part of that was we spent the beginning of each rehearsal mired in current affairs.
Really?
That we had up to an hour's discussion sometimes of everything that was going on in the news.
Yeah.
Mostly with a UK focus, but sometimes with a wider current affairs focus. And initially we were looking at a news story as the get, but then we asked for a current affairs theme. So we've done the housing crisis, the weather, the economy, all this kind of thing. And every time I do a joke about... So I go on stage at the beginning as the government, and saying, well, your beloved government, in our infinite wisdom, have decided that we're going to have an inquiry to shut you up. And it's something that we've cared about a great deal for a long time. Let's just see what your suggestions are. And we won't
written suggestions.
Because it's awkward for the audience to shout things out, because some people want... You know all the reasons for it, but it's much easier to do things from written suggestions. Then you don't have to have that negotiation there. People still get to submit things. Yeah. And so usually I'll go through a few, because then people get to see that they've been listened to. But also I will overrule them, so they get to feel that they are not listened to really get the full feeling of modern democracy. And every time I'll say, and we're not doing Brexit because that's going brilliant. And... yeah, then I pass over to the panel and they do the show, and I stand at the back and go, oh, I wish I were doing that. It's it's some fun, isn't it? But by being mired in all the current affairs stuff, we've been a lot more geared towards the satire of it, a lot more on it with the themes and being able to play characters who are both a character but also representing something else. It does help that we have the panel at the side saying, that's clearly Theresa May. In the beginning we leant a bit too heavily on that, and every single scene was, that's Theresa May! And then the people in the scene are going, how do we make this work? So it's a learning process, but it's difficult to do satire. Even having worked on it for 5 weeks, we haven't found a magic bullet. You just need to keep working on it and be in that milieu. So there's no clear answers there. It's almost like an inquiry in that sense, that we set out for answers and in the end we end up with compromise and letdown.
But you also had props.
Yes.
Tell me about the props in Heads Might Roll.
Briefcases, because of course you need a briefcase. A timer to tell people when to shut up. A tambourine, that was just for a laugh. Wigs, just for at the end when they give their judgment, they stick barristers' wigs on. We did look into them wearing them throughout, but they're very uncomfortable. You can just about cope with 2 or 3 minutes. They're cheap synthetic ones. I did look into getting proper barristers' wigs, but they start at about $5,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and the budget was generous, but nowhere near that generous. So
sorry, Jules, I've spent it all on a wig, and you owe the makers.
These things happen. But that was a lot of... Oh, also we have a gavel. Obviously we have a gavel, so you go... next thing. It's a lot of fun to gavel. Everyone loves to gavel. Also we have a curtain over the table they're sitting at so that the gavel isn't too loud. Because the thing about gavels is...
They're surprisingly loud.
Yep. Very loud. So that's been a lot of fun, and we're looking at continuing the run of that beyond the nursery's initial run. So they've given us our 5 shows, I think, and then we've got at least one coming up after that run. So hopefully we'll be able to do more with it. I'm interested in the idea of taking it into a wider format, that we could try getting expert guests and actually run an inquiry of sorts with real people who know things.
Wow. And
then shop it around as a televisual format and make my first million.
Sounds marvellous.
Doesn't it, though?
Let's talk about somewhat theatre.
Why?
Let's talk about... Because that's the nature of the podcast.
Oh,
you do something, I ask you about it,
that's fair.
and then you talk about it.
So, Somewhat Theatre formed after doing a few intensives with Dave Rosowski, and I'd been in a previous group which was Rosowskian in its mode, which was Misunderstood Commander, which was me and Prabs. And when he abandoned me and moved away to Berlin...
Hello, Prabs.
Nope. Not going to do it. Not going to say hello.
Too soon.
Still
too
raw.
soon.
Still
raw.
I felt abandoned, dejected, and I needed my fix of that kind of thing. And also, I genuinely think that the stuff Prabs and I did, even though it was like 18 months ago, 2 years ago, or so on, still ranks as amongst the best improv I've ever done. And I can't speak for Prabs because he might have gone on to do much better stuff since, but it was amongst my favourite stuff I'd seen of his, and that's no low bar. So it was wonderful. It was just the two of us on stage, responding to each other and fucking with each other, but in a very nuanced and analytic way. And so it would start off with 5 minutes of no jokes whatsoever, nothing funny, and then people would be in stitches by the end, because that's the way that approach tends to end up. And it was lovely. It was really theatrical. It was... I feel sad that we're not currently doing it. It's so good. I mean, perhaps it's amazing, so it was always going to be. But we landed on that almost by accident, because we'd been talking about doing a 2-prov for ages and hadn't landed on the approach to take. And then we did stuff with Rosowski, and Prab said, we should do that. Because, as I said, he's a brilliant man. And it was wonderful. And so, Somewhat Theatre was... The idea there is to do theatrical stuff like that. We don't want to just ape the Rosowskian approach, and recently we've tried experimenting with a lot of different approaches, not all of which work, but some of which really have done. So there was a really fun show where there were 5 of us out of a total of 8 on team at the moment, and we were playing at Hoopla, and we thought, well, Hoopla, midweek, it's going to be half improv nerds and half real people, and everyone's going to want fun, so we'll do something that will work for both those halves on different levels. So we said, okay, we are all going to do an improv form. So there are various types of improv, there are different forms, and we've all decided on a form to do, and we haven't told each other. And so we ended up doing that. And so we had a monoscene, a bat, a musical, and theatre sports all going on at once. Now, 2 of us had decided on a monoscene. We don't know what we're doing yet, but that's the joy of improv. If you know what you're doing it wrong. That's not true, but it felt profound for the first half of saying it. And, you know, there's fun to be had with playing theatrical and pretentious. There's an excellent group, a trio that you might be familiar with who do that kind of thing. They're called The Dreaming. Yeah. You thought I was going to say Big Now, but I actually said The Dreaming, because I want to give a shout out to them because they're excellent. And they really play into the pretension and theatre of improv, and it's lovely. Have you seen them?
No, I don't think I have.
You should.
I will look out for them.
Do. And so, for a long time, Somewhat were doing adaptations of existing stories, and that's been a lot of fun. We did Jurassic Park, and that was from the perspective of the dinosaurs, of course. We did Where's Spot, which was an existential journey. It drew a lot from Kafka and Beckett, of course.
Of course.
And it was a lot of fun, because none of us could remember the story, and we don't think there is one. So it's been interesting trying to find the balance between how much of the original do we throw in, and how much do we just go, cool, we're going this direction now from the starting point, let's go there. So that's quite experimental. And here's a funny thing. When you were talking to Lizzie way back when, and you were talking about 2 of Wands, what I consider to be a very experimental improv project, then Somewhat Theatre, which is deliberately a very experimental improv project, and then you talked about Big Now, which was supposed to be fun. And that's the one that you found difficult and experimental. And I won't pretend I didn't feel a bit of pride at that. It was never meant to be that way, but, you know, we're difficult people. I'm difficult people, especially. And you wouldn't have it any other way, because otherwise you'd end up with a really tedious show, like Dr. Improv or something.
Ooh.
That's not fair. I love Bryn. He's marvellous. Have you had Bryn on and
Bryn
you just
marvellous.
nerded out the whole time?
Yeah, episode 50.
Yes, I've listened to all of them. I said that earlier. Yeah.
Bryn is very good. Hello, Bryn.
He is very good. You know, when you're watching a team and you go, there's one person on that team who's really holding the team up, as in lifting it up. And then there are other times you watch a team and you go, oh, there's one person really holding the team up, like really, yeah.
Let's talk about, more generally, improv. Is improv maths to you? Is improv a problem that needs to be solved when you're on stage?
No.
So, okay, the reason I asked that is because I've been in a workshop with you, and you were saying that you never imagine, I might be misquoting you, never actually imagine yourself in the scene.
Ah, right. You're talking about my aphantasia. So I am not capable of mental images. When I close my eyes, there is just darkness. And not in a metaphorical way, I can't see things that aren't there. I didn't even know it was a thing until a few years back when, with a little bit of help, I saw some lovely mental images for an evening, and then realised, oh, this is a thing that people can do without a bit of chemical help. And so I thought, oh, something's different about me. And before that point, I thought I was the same as everyone else and not in any way special and, very ordinary. And then I realised that I was not, and that there was this unusual thing. And speaking to other people about it, it turns out it's very unusual. Apparently 1 in 50 people have it. It's very difficult for improv, because in a lot of classes, particularly early classes before you get into the specific techniques and so on, people will say, okay, so imagine a door. I'll go, okay, I'm imagining a door. And they'll say, okay, open that door. What's through it? I'll go, I don't know. And they'll say, yeah, but what do you see? Nothing. There's nothing there. And a lot of the time, people will think I'm being obtuse, because A, they've met me, and B, it's apparently quite a difficult thing for people to wrap their head around, that there are some people who don't see things when they close their eyes. And that's weird to me, because surely just imagine nothing, and that's what I see. I don't think in words either. And that's apparently even harder for people to get their heads around, because they go, what do you think in? Well,
what do you think in?
I think in thoughts. And that, to me, was a fairly straightforward idea until I discovered that everyone else has these other things going on. What it's like is a computer. A computer will think in machine code and will translate it via the medium of a monitor or speakers into sound, into words, into pictures. And I don't have that. Actually, I do think in sound sometimes. It doesn't happen naturally, but I can do it. But that's the only one I can do. And I can think about words, but I don't have anything like an internal monologue or dialogue or anything like that. I can think about words. But because I'm not thinking in words, when I speak, I have an automatic process to convert what I'm thinking into words. So I don't need to think about it, it's just happening. But then when someone says, I don't understand, could you reword that or reframe it or explain that in some other way, I really break down, because then I have to go, okay, I can't use this automatic process. I now have to sift through words which I'm not used to doing, and then find different ones, whereas I thought that was perfectly straightforward. And, I have problems with empathy that you might have noticed. I struggle with actually trying to get myself understood at times, and it frustrates me when people just don't get it. So it's quite tricky sometimes to do improv because other people are seeing wonderful things and I've got none of it. So I'm not great at space work or defining a scene, because if someone says, over here in this corner of the stage there's a table, and they'll say that by using the table somehow, and I'll go, great, there's a table there, but I won't see it, I'll just have to remember there's a table there. And I have quite a good spatial understanding. I can, usually find my way around a place quite well when I move somewhere by getting lost in the area deliberately, and then I've found a lot of back streets and I'll go, cool, now I know a lot of vectors around here and I can add them together and work out where I am. I cycle a lot, so I have a good kind of geographic understanding, because you have to, because you're constantly going around on routes and you can't rely on tube maps and such. Mm. So I know where things are, but I can't see them, and so I can't do the whole thing of going, okay, I have a table in front of me, and on it there is a telephone, and next to the telephone there is a mug, and the mug says world's best mug. And in that mug there are pens. I don't know.
Well, you say you can't do it, but you did just do it.
That was very artificial. Just none of that came automatically.
Right, okay.
And you will notice that we are in an office where there is a table, there's mugs full of pens. Now, I might not have been looking at them at the exact point I said it, but they were there.
Oh.
There is admittedly no landline, because we are currently sitting in the 21st century. So, I don't have that. I have difficulties communicating with people anyway. Like, I can't really read emotions on people's face. When it's big, I suppose I can, but there's a lot of nuance there that I just don't get. And that's really difficult. It's really, like, for improv, that's so hard. And coupled with the not seeing things, it's not great. And so, you've seen me do my solo piece,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
So to explain to the audience at home, that is a piece where I play someone talking to an audience of sorts. So it's not the same each time, of course, it's improv. But so sometimes I'll be a preacher talking to a congregation, or I'll be a person at a conference talking to a crowd at a conference, or a politician talking to a campaign crowd. Always someone talking to a crowd, because then there isn't that weird disconnect, which I didn't realise wasn't a problem for other people, of one solo performer talking to an empty space and then either responding to what that empty space has said or turning into the other person. Both of those are really awkward to my mind. I don't like the look of them, I don't like the feel of them, and yet I've seen wonderful shows that do them. It's just, for me, I have difficulty wrapping my head around it. And so I did something that, not even thinking about the reasons behind it, but something that worked for my mind, of course, because I'm not going to do something that didn't work for my mind. And for ages, I'd been waxing lyrical about the one other person on the scene who does something similar. And by similar, I mean completely different, but something that achieves a similar thing. Nick Orham's Playmobil Players, where he has the players in front of him and he will move them about. So there's an object permanence there, a literal object permanence, and there's a continuity to what's going on, and a persistence. It's the persistence that's important, because when you're playing one side, there isn't a persistence to what the other side is doing. The other person could be anywhere as far as you know, but when they're made of Playmobil and you can see them, it's very clear. And I was talking to Nick a while back. Turns out he has the same same thing. He can't see mental images, and that fascinated me. And also, it was a huge relief because I felt that it's been holding me back, and to a degree it has been. But if Nick Oram, who is one of the best improvisers that I've ever met, has the same thing, then the sky's the limit. So that was a wonderful feeling, and we've talked about that in the past, and it's fascinating to share our approaches and to go, I'm not alone. I didn't think I was, but it's nice to be certain about it and to go, okay, I can see where I can go from here because there's someone there.
Yeah. And
it's not lonely. And that's great, because loneliness is horrible.
Yes.
And that's why I do improv, because if I don't, then it's just a howling void. So, people say, how do you cope doing improv 4 or 5 nights a week? It's like, no, this is my coping strategy. If I didn't, I would be alone and terrified. So, I'm sorry, we're talking a lot about mental illness today, aren't we?
Fascinating, because I didn't know this about you.
Well, I was about to say I don't talk about it much, but I do. It's just, amongst improvisers, we end up talking about improv.
That is true.
And so, a lot of people I consider very close friends, I don't know anything about them. Because we'll meet at shows, after workshops, and most of what we talk about will be improv, and sometimes what we talk about will be improvising. We'll just be improvising amongst ourselves and doing bits. That's wonderful. So I know these people because I feel who they are and how they react, and I've been so many different people with them, and they've been so many different people with me, and I've felt who they are underneath, but I don't know about their history or anything. And yeah, I'm completely fine talking about all my mental illness and so on, but it just doesn't come up at shows. Like we haven't had that relationship heretofore. So I got into improv through a manic episode. I was at Grand Theft Impro and was in the middle of a week-long manic episode, the only one I've had, and hopefully the last one I'll ever have, touch wood. But I had no sense of a filter, so I couldn't really say no to things, which is great for making life changes, but it's quite dangerous for making life changes. Also for cycling through traffic. You really want to have a filter. You really want to be able to say no. Will Hines has this great metaphor of no in improv is like the brakes. You can't be doing no all the time, but you need to do no sometimes, because otherwise you're going to crash and die. And that's lovely. That's a lovely metaphor, but also in a literal sense, I didn't really have that going on. And so I was in a dangerous place, and went to GTI, as I said, and I was talking with Charlotte Gittins, amongst others, and she was saying, you should do an improv class. And I said, yes, and, because that's what you do when you don't have a filter. I didn't realise that I was in the perfect state to improvise. Thankfully it came to an end, but that's when I did my first and last stand-up set as well. I wrote 3,000 words in 2 hours.
Wow.
And then wept. And then got on the DLR and phoned my parents, because that's what you do in a situation like that, and then wept again in front of a carriage full of strangers. Very liberating. But that's why I do improv, because it quiets all that down and keeps me wanting to be alive.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I feel
No, it's okay.
I understand you a lot more than I did.
I doubt that.
Well, there's still much to learn, I imagine.
I mean, I knew all that already, and I don't understand myself. So, hey ho. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah. How's the Howling Void for you?
eternal, but we find our ways to fill it.
We do, exactly, and that's quite nice. And some of those things are positive,
Yes.
and others of those things are destructive. And thankfully, improv is, for the most part, a positive one. When it becomes a kind of addiction, it can be a problem. And then you end up spending all your time doing it, and you're not sleeping enough, and you get to the weekend and you go, but I don't have any time to rest because I'm doing a 2-day intensive with some brilliant person come over from Chicago or New York or wherever. And then Sunday evening comes about and you go, well, I'll do a show. And then Monday morning comes about and you go, fuck. This again. But it's fine, because you get to Monday evening, and of course you've got a nice gentle set at Duck Duck Goose, and then you've got Tuesday morning, you've got more work again, and then you get to Tuesday evening, and you go, oh, well, I've got a rehearsal, and then... So there are problems there, and I've had to schedule in nights off. I should be scheduling in more of them. I'm not resting enough. I'm not taking care of myself the way I should be. But if I have a night in, I get quite introspective, and there's a lot to think about, and I don't want to. I really don't want to think about it. It makes me very unhappy. Actually, no, very unhappy's the good one. Then I'm feeling something. For the audience at home, I've been staring into space for slightly too long now. Basically, if I had any advice to young up-and-coming improvisers today, it would be don't do too much. I used to be in, I think it was 7 teams at once, and over the course of about maybe a year, maybe 6 months, I dropped most of them, which was a really difficult thing to do because I loved every one of those groups. So, Stuart, you warned me at the beginning not to try listing people in groups because you'll miss one off. I'm now going to try listing groups, and I might miss one off.
Be brave, be bold, that's what improv's all about.
Yeah. So, obviously there was Big Now, there was Somewhat Theatre, there was my solo project, which I don't do so much these days because I did a whole year of doing open mics with that, and when you've had 6 consecutive open mic nights, it's wearying in a way that improv nights aren't, because it's not the community that I've spent time with. Like, the community in improv is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's not the only reason I do it, but it's a great reason to do it. I've met so many good friends through it, like Big Now, for instance, and Somewhat Theatre. Like, the people I play with. It's no accident that I play with these people. I think they're brilliant improvisers, but also I think they're brilliant people. And so, all that kind of thing. So those are the 3 I've mentioned so far. Misunderstood Commander, which I mentioned earlier. An Excess of Bees, which was me and Tom Leving. That just went by the wayside because he's even more busy than I am. Impetus, which was rather. Unfortunately, they're not going anymore. Monkey Toast Herald team that David Shaw put together, and it was a really interesting selection of people that I couldn't see the organising principle behind it, but what came out was lovely. We were coached by Ben Fogg, who is a wonderful chap, and he was really happy to push us in new directions to try harder things, and that was wonderful. I loved working with those guys. I mean, all of these groups. Who else?
The Age of Adventure?
The Age of Adventure, or before that, The Adventurers. We changed lineup. That was a lot of fun. Love those guys as well. But the real problem there was it was very, very colonial. And we'd never meant it to be, and it's really awkward because we just meant it to be a playful knockabout adventure in the style of like King Solomon's Mines or other Empire era things, and then it became that we were making a comment about Empire, which we don't have the nuance or understanding to do, and so it ended up that we were just playing something which was very white and unpleasantly so. And if you remember, Ty Campbell had a piece in The Stage about how the improv scene isn't that welcoming if you're not white, and that gave us food for thought, because I realised that was exactly the problem with what we were doing, that heaven forfend, we were not doing anything actively racist, but we were doing nothing at all to improve the scene, to make it more welcoming for anyone who didn't look like us. And we were quite probably putting people off by... people would come along to a night and go, oh, here's 3 white people doing very white material. And it's not what we'd meant to do at all. And it's just we'd been unthinking. And when we realised that, we couldn't justify doing it anymore. And that's an awkward conversation to have with each other, but it's even more awkward to have with yourself. And the last thing we wanted to do was be part of the problem. And yeah, so we dropped that. I feel bad about having done that. In the first place, we could have done something similar without touching on any of those themes at all, but we didn't, and that was careless, to put it mildly. So I'm glad we're not doing that anymore. I still want to work with those guys, but we'll find other projects if we have time at any point. When would we have time? And then. Duck Duck Tales.
Duck Duck Tales.
Great fun. The Duck Duck Goose guys are just so wonderfully playful, and I couldn't commit to the rehearsals, and it wasn't fair on them to do the shows without rehearsing.
No.
And I think that was the main one that made me realise I'd taken on too much, because for a lot of the others I was organising rehearsals because I default to adminning, and for that other people were organising rehearsals, and I was just going, I can't make these. And then I realised, why is it so hard with this one and not the others? It's because I'm letting the others down by not organising things. And so I just went, I have to step back. And it wasn't all at once, it was just a gradual process of going, this isn't working, and a matter of prioritising what I can give time to.
Yeah.
And I'd advise that for everyone. Don't take on too much. Now, because I'm only in a couple of teams, there's the ones I mentioned and Improbotics Limited.
Cool.
But you've had people on recently to talk about that. But I just want to point out that as part of that, I managed to fail a Turing test. I don't think I get enough credit for that. So, yeah, but that means that I have the time to take on short-term projects, which is great, because the nursery originals, and so I've been in a few of those, and they continue to be great fun.
Cool.
Fun? Yeah, fun, that's a word.
So, big final question. As you've listened to every episode of this podcast, you know what I'm going to ask.
Yes.
What is
Who killed JR?
Well, wasn't that Bobby Ewing?
Well, I mean, it was all a dream, which is a real cop-out.
Yes.
And if ever I see someone do that in an improv scene, I would be delighted, because no one does it. So it's such a cop-out that, there are some things you see in improv and you go, oh, that's a bit of a cop-out. But then you have something like that, which is a real cop-out in a narrative way. And because improv is so yes-oriented, you can just go in that direction no matter what. People don't cop it out like that. They never have to bring it down to earth. Yes, you'll end up in Crazy Town, but no one ever goes, and that Crazy Town was all a dream. And sometimes you'll have people will get fixated on some wording that someone else has said, and then the whole set becomes about that, and you go, everyone's laughing, but it doesn't actually seem fun. So this is the thing that I was saying earlier about the audience experience. Just laughing, I don't think, is enough. And so there'll be sets where you get to the end of and you go, I was laughing constantly, but I didn't enjoy the set. And then there'll be other ones where you go, I think I laughed twice, but that was one of the best things I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that stuff that I've done is in the latter category, but I'd love to be leaning that way.
Cool. What's your signature move?
Here's the problem. So I'm not the person to ask. It would be people who've played with me a lot, but I think it's probably puns, and I hate that. Because that's not improv, that's just wordplay. And I never mean to do it, but it's always too hard to resist. And that's a thing that I'm known for, and for some people it's the thing I'm known for. And I don't want to be doing it. And I need better discipline around that. Like, there are other opportunities to make jokes that I'll also go for and shouldn't. One of the first things you learn, certainly in long form, is don't make jokes, and I still do it. And I just go, yeah, but it's too good to resist. But there are people who've been doing this like 3 or 4 times longer than I have who do the same thing, and I just watch and go, I mean, I'm sad, but at least it's just as hard for you as it is for me. But I want to stop. I don't want to be doing that, because it doesn't help the show, it doesn't help the scene, and it never gets the laugh you think it will. And I know that going in, but every time I believe, for some reason, this particular zinger is going to knock their absolute socks off. And then you hear the audience, and if anything, they're putting on more socks. And no one wants that. Just a crowd just wearing 5 pairs of socks each. So it's that.
Thank you for being on the Improv London podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I made this.
That's improv!